Fourth, as I said earlier, we're going to look at history as a resource to be learned from and used. And this is my challenge, when you run into a problem, the first thing you should ask is, who else has had this problem and how did they solve it? And then go study people who solved it, because it is cheaper to imitate than to invent. It's a basic rule, and it's one of the reasons I ended up as Speaker of the House, is that every time I bounce into a problem, I try to stop and say, okay, now who already has solved this somewhere in history? I then go read their solution. I then ask, will that one work here? Does it have a good idea? Is it worth doing? Fifth, there are techniques that can help you learn problem solving from historic experience. There's a way of practicing immersing yourself in this. And one of them I just gave you. Every time you run into I mean, you don't do this for everything, but every time you run into a significant problem, stop and say, who solved this somewhere else? Go to the library and ask them, what books do you have on this topic? Who has already done it? And start from there. But you also, whether history is not just written, go find somebody you know personally who's already solved it and ask them to teach you. I mean, a large part of my life, beginning when I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, is an instinctive, automatic search for people I can apprentice myself to. Well, what are you doing when you apprentice yourself to somebody? You're getting them to give you the oral tradition of their history. You are successful. Why are you successful? And try to remember the great leader of Coca-Cola for many, many years. Woodruff. I saw Herman Cain, who's the head of Godfather Pizza, who lives in Omaha, Nebraska. He's an African American, born in Atlanta. His father was Woodruff's chauffeur. So he has great lineage intellectually because Woodruff talked around his father. And then Woodruff and his father talked around him. And so while his dad was, we would say, well, your dad's only a chauffeur. Yeah, he was a chauffeur to one of the most successful business leaders in American history. So guess what the quality of Herman Cain's education was before he was 18? Okay? And that's what I mean is, but you're learning the history of what Woodruff did. Why did Woodruff know it was right? Because he spent 50 years of his life practicing. Now you get to learn either, this is how I did it, and you copy it down and you skip the 50 years. So history is not just written, it's also oral. Now, we want to focus on actively listening and reading. And you want to ask yourself, by that I mean, don't be passive. Ask yourself first, what are the hidden lessons in what I'm experiencing? Second, how does it apply to me? And third, what additional questions does it lead to? Now, by hidden lessons, and you'll see us, we're going to do an experiment in a minute. By hidden lessons, I mean the fact is that everybody has a tendency to be passive. You receive it, but you need to actively be in the TV when you watch it. You need to actively be in the book. You need to actively be in the conversation, probing, asking questions, thinking, what does this mean? What can I learn here? But second, and this is the key to all real learning, how does it apply to me? I'll just guarantee you, if you're learning for you, you will learn 30 or 40 times more intensely than if you're learning for the teacher. And if you get in the habit of learning for you, you'll learn all your life. If you get in the habit of learning for the teacher, you'll learn till the test. It's a totally different model of what learning is about. And then lastly, as soon as you learn this batch, you ought to say to yourself, now what does that lead me to ask? What additional questions does it lead me to? Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to actively watch, ask questions of yourself, make notes as we watch 2 minutes on Gettysburg. Then we're going to stop and I'm going to ask you, what did you learn and what questions might this lead you to out of Gettysburg? Okay, so let's take a look, if we could, at where we're at on Gettysburg. And I think you can watch on the monitors.
On November 19th, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate the new Union Cemetery. The featured speaker was Edward Everett of Massachusetts, a diplomat, clergyman, and celebrated orator. The president had been invited almost as an afterthought to offer a few appropriate remarks. Everett spoke for not quite 2 hours. Then Lincoln rose. A local photographer took his time focusing. Presumably, the president could be counted on to go on for a while. But he spoke just 269 words. He started off by reminding his audience that just 87 years had passed since the founding of the nation. And then he went on to embolden the Union cause with some of the most stirring words ever spoken. Lincoln was heading back to his seat before the photographer could open the shutter.
He felt that he had failed, that it was a poor speech, that the people didn't like it. It was so brief, less than 2 minutes. He felt that he had failed. Lehman, his friend Ward Lehman, was sitting next to him on the stand. When he sat down, there was just a sprinkling of applause. And he said, "Lehman, that speech won't scowl. That's what you say about a plow in the prairies when the mud doesn't come off it."
The cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, dishwatery utterances of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States. Chicago Times.
Dear Mr. President, I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes. Edward Everett.
Okay. So what do you think? What do you get out of that? What lessons, if any, can you pull out of that? Or what questions?
It doesn't take a long time to say a lot.
Okay. I'm gonna shorten it, say a lot briefly. What else?
Sometimes initial response by witnesses or media witnesses is not really relevant.
Initial response can be misleading. I'm going to take the teacher's prerogative second and pull a second thing out of what you said. The media can be wrong.
No.
This, by the way, you want to understand how important history is, at least to me. Nothing which has ever been said about me is comparable to what was said about Lincoln or what Jefferson and Hamilton said about each other through papers that they subsidized. This is a tough business. And it has always in America. That's why American history is useful. This isn't Russia. This isn't China. This isn't a controlled press. This country is the most rough and tumble, brutal political system in the world. Except we don't kill each other. So we don't have secret police. You don't get assassinated. You don't have the Night of the Long Knives in which Hitler wiped out hundreds of people. But verbally, we sublimate our violence by just being unbelievable to each other. And there's a long tradition. I mean, you can actually do a paper on what was said about Lincoln after the speech. And it's just, about half the newspapers were just devastated.